Great, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Rihanna Putnam and I'm the Community Engagement Specialist for the Citizen Science Association. I have just a few housekeeping notes and some slides about the CSA, and then I'll turn it over to our moderator, Rebecca Johnson, and author Mary Ellen Hannibal to talk about the book. The CSA is a member-driven organization that connects people from a wide range of experiences around a shared purpose of advancing knowledge through research and monitoring done by, for, and with members of the public. Our efforts are concentrated into a biennial conference. Our next one is in May 2021, a peer-reviewed journal and member services such as our working groups, online networking, and webinars like these. Our membership represents the multidisciplinary and multidimensional nature of the field and includes project leaders, researchers, educators, and more. Membership dues are an important contribution to the work that we're doing to create connections across this field. If you're not already a member, now's a great time to join. Getting involved with the CSA is a great way to make connections, grow as a leader in the field, and help support the association. We have 9 working groups that explore cross-cutting issues like ethics, data and metadata, policy, evaluation, and more. Our working groups are one of the key ways we work to advance the goals of the CSA through the sharing of resources, best practices, and relevant information, both among group members and also to the broader citizen science community. We have been offering a lot of webinars over the last month and still have a few more to come. We have our annual members meeting coming up next week, which is a good opportunity to learn more about what we're doing at CSA. We have a roundtable on using citizen science in higher education scheduled for the 11th of May, and there will be some virtual happy hours to follow on that topic. We also have a webinar on building trustworthy data practices on the 14th, and then at the end of the month, we have a webinar on citizen science, community engagement, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Though this webinar was free to register, we encourage you to make a donation of any amount if you're in a position to pitch in. We believe that community-supported webinars, particularly those from our working groups and led by volunteers, shouldn't be paywalled. So if you find value in this learning opportunity and have the means, you can help cover the cost to keep webinars free for those who can't pay. So we do have this event set up in meeting mode today and look forward to hearing from many of you. For now, if you can please double check and make sure that your audio and video are both turned off. We're going to let Rebecca and Mary Ellen talk for a bit. If you want to introduce yourself in the chat, we'd encourage you to do so. You'll want to make sure the messages are set to everyone so we can all see your responses. If you want to tell us who you are, where you're calling from, and if you're affiliated with any citizen science project. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca Johnson, who's the co-director for Citizen Science at the California Academy of Sciences, who will tell us a little bit more about the event today and introduce Mary Ellen. Big thanks to you both.
Thanks so much, Rihanna. And yeah, thanks to Rihanna and to Jennifer Shirk, the Executive Director of the Citizen Science Association, for organizing this and asking us to do this today and kind of bringing us together in conversation. We were commenting earlier about how many of us have attended or been part of webinars during this time at home. And I think hopefully this will be a little bit different, that we'll have a little chance to share our opinions and have a discussion that's a little bit less meeting-y or content-y, and just like a discussion between colleagues and friends about Mary Ellen's book and citizen science and the work we all do together. So I would like to introduce Mary Ellen Hannibal, who is an author and citizen scientist, an amazing advocate for citizen science. And we're going to talk about her book, Citizen Scientists Searching for Heroes and Hope in the Age of Extinction. But she's written other books, and so I hope maybe we'll get a chance to talk about some of her other work, and hopefully at the end we'll get to hear about what she's working on now. So Mary Ellen, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself a little bit more, or we can just dive into questions if there's. Well, you're muted though, so unmute yourself. I can unmute you. There you go.
Just dive in. I'll talk about some of my other work while we talk, as responding to some of the issues.
Great. Well, I thought a nice way to start is kind of how we first met. So we first met back in, it was probably 2011, I want to say, maybe even a little bit earlier, when you came to the Academy because you were researching this book, Citizen Scientist. You were just starting researching this book. And our program at the Academy of Sciences, our Citizen Science program that's co-led by me and my co-director, Allison Young, we were forming our program, really. It was like the beginning of our program. We were really thinking about what citizen science should look like at a natural history museum and at the California Academy of Sciences. And so you really shadowed us and were part of the formation. And then really, I've been thinking about how you have been part of the journey of our department and our program the whole time. So I thought maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you came to think about writing this book and what brought you to like our office on that day, or our offices, to start thinking about citizen science.
Well, I had actually come to the Academy for years before we met, really, although we probably passed in the halls, although my journey to citizen science really begins in 2007 and 8. When I was researching a book that came out in 2009 called Evidence of Evolution. And that's a book that explains evolution. And it was written in honor of Darwin's birthday and the anniversary of On the Origin of Species. And I focused on specimens from the Academy to talk about taxonomy and the tree of life. And at the time, the Academy in Golden Gate Park was being renovated entirely. The old one had been torn down, and this new Renzo Piano building that's there now was being built. So I started researching that book before there was the current Academy. And then I was really earnestly looking at the specimens and interviewing curators before the new building opened. And so I got to really haunt the halls when they were pretty empty. And sometimes I go back to the Academy and I feel like, who are all these people in here? Where's my museum? But it was during that research that I really understood the sixth mass extinction that's going on, because so many scientists were telling me about it. And this is well before Elizabeth Colbert's book, Sixth Extinction came out. So it was not on the front burner of anybody except for scientists. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to help this cause. I have to help get it out there that this is happening, and then also what can we do about it? Why is it happening, and what can we do about it? So then I researched and wrote my next book, The Spine of the Continent, which came out in 2012. And that is about the birth of conservation biology, which is the science of saving nature. And it's a science that sought to bring this wild and woolly field of ecology into a more quantitative field that would be taken more seriously by the other sciences, and that could really actually quantify what's going on in nature so that it would be better and easier, or it would just give us a pathway somehow to responding to pressures on nature through legislation and protection. And it was really all about bringing science to conservation. Conservation was the realm of Ansel Adams and David Brower and a lot of big feelings, but it wasn't about the data. And so I was writing The Spine of the Continent, and that's the Alaska down to Mexico, and covering all of these species and what was going on with them, and wonderful, incredible activists working on behalf of species and ecosystems. But I was saying to myself, well, where are the protections? Where's the legislation? Where's the habitat being protected? And the answer was like hardly anywhere. And I'm afraid, that ledger, that balance sheet is still pretty much like that. Like, it's really burningly painful to me that we work and we care so much about saving nature, and the rest of the world doesn't incorporate the values of nature, however you want to quantify, however you want to express that, whether it's intrinsic value or instrumental value, however you want to call it. We need nature, and we act as though we don't need it. So I was saying, okay, what along the spine of the continent is actually having conservation outcomes that can be quantified? And then there were two things also that I was hearing over and over and over again from NGOs and natural resource managers, which was we need more data and we need more people to help us have a public awareness of what's going on to support protection. And so when I actually made my own little ledger of where are the projects that are actually having outcomes, they all had the same denominator, which was they all enjoined regular people to help collect data. And at that time, none of them were really called citizen science. One of them that was very influential on me was called Citizen Tracker, which was, I learned how to track big carnivores in Mexico and Arizona. So then I said, okay, this is it. Like, the other thing that was converging for me was, and I think this is a very positive, and it's the Anthropocene in a positive way, is technology and our ever more sophisticated ways of observing the natural world are converging more and more with what we can put in our hand in our smartphone to really maximize the personal observations about what's going on. So I was also seeing that the National Park Service was using data from NASA to try to help them figure out what the climate change impacts were going to be on their flora and fauna as the future unfolds. So NASA, like, how does that go together with people on the ground doing restoration projects? Well, it turns out it does go together. So I thought, oh, citizen science converges all of these things. And I had been exposed to, I met Scott Laurie, and before he got involved with iNaturalist, and I interviewed Kenichi, I think, before they became partners. So I was kind of in on the ground floor of iNaturalist, as well as with the Academy. And one thing about the Academy that was super fun for me is, I mean, I'm just kind of a nerd about natural history. So I love environmental history, and I love the history of these institutions. And the Academy, like all natural history museums, was founded by amateurs. And many of the specimens that are in those vaults were collected by amateurs. And the importance of that is there's something very basic about curiosity and involvement with nature that is, you don't have to have a PhD to do it. So that's what I said, I'm going to do this, my next book about citizen science, because I want to help it grow. And, you know, even though we're not saving nature well enough, citizen science is growing, and it's really, really wonderful to be a part of that and to just really see how it's moving in all these different directions, and to observe it and help it whenever I can.
Awesome. It's one of the things I love about natural history museums as well, mine in particular, but just the connection to the people that came before, right? And the stories, and that so many people realize the value of making natural history museum collections and sharing their observations without necessarily knowing how those data would be used immediately, right? Like, they had some immediate questions about what they're collecting, you know, what beetles are found on this hill, right? But also in saving and making a collection, you're providing the data to answer questions you can't even imagine.
That's fantastic.
And I feel like we have the opportunity to do that with citizen science, right? With people collecting and making and sharing their observations of nature. They're not making collections of specimens, but they might be taking a picture for lots of different reasons and sharing it on iNaturalist. But those data together create this library that can answer these bigger questions. And so I love that it's like this continuation of that history, the kind of work that we do.
And that happens on many different levels with citizen science. You know, I'm thinking of Rachel Carson and how she's, you know, collected data from Hawk Hill on the East Coast. She looked at the data of hawk migrations, and that's where she saw what was happening, like why were these populations plummeting, and she was able to correlate that with the use of DDT, and then she was able to create a story out of that. So we love Rachel Carson, and she's, you know, a huge heroine of mine, but she also connected to all those people who made all those observations of hawks over decades and decades. So yes, all those people were paying it forward to Rachel Carson. And that's, I think, it inspires me a lot when I take a photo of, and I put it on iNaturalist, or, you know, I give a bird observation to eBird, which I don't always do because I'm not very good at bird ID. But I'm like, who is going to use this data who hasn't even maybe been born yet? And also, you know, today, Rebecca, when we're in this moment in time, we're all sequestered, and there's this, I have this feeling of, you know, we're losing the past every minute, right? We're losing a connection. We have a no analog future in terms of climate change. But citizen science not only points us to a future that might be more palatable, but it also embeds us in the past in this way that is very meaningful and grounding to be part of.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's this thing that you know, when you make and share an observation, you can think about the people that were there before, right? That may have made a similar observation. It connects you to this kind of practice, I guess, of observing nature. And for some people, it's a new practice. For some people, right now, being home, you know, is the first time that they've really paid attention to the nature, maybe on their street or in their backyard, because this is where our nature is right now that we can access. I know for me, I've noticed things in my backyard that I have never noticed before, right? And I've lived here for 20 years, right? I just haven't spent so much time sitting still in my backyard. Or if I'm out looking for nature, I'm on like a nature trail or in an open space, right? So it's a different way of paying attention. But, you know, I think about that, just being still and looking for nature where you are is this, you know, this practice really that connects us to people everywhere, back in time. And then, you know, right now that we're all doing this, or many of us are doing this, the same activity that we might normally be doing in person together, but we're doing it separately in our homes, is a different kind of connection.
Yes, and we are, I mean, one positive thing is that we're all doing this, you know, sheltering in place on behalf of the whole.
Right.
You know, it's in terms of the process of like writing a book about this,
Yeah.
that kind of connection is not something I decided I'm going to show this. It's something that revealed itself to me over and over again. And, you know, there's you know, Rebecca, for those of you who don't know, is a marine biologist, and she leads monitoring in the tide pool that I try to go whenever I possibly can. And that was the first of the Cal Academy's forays into citizen science, was to monitor at Pillar Point. And when you go out into the tide pool, people say, you know, and you show a lot of interest in it, they say, you've got to read this book by Ed Ricketts called Between Pacific Tides, which he wrote about the coast, the intertidal on the West Coast. In, I can't remember the year that was published. It might have been 1941, or it was around then. So you get into Ed Ricketts, who was John Steinbeck's great friend, and he was the model for Cannery Row, for a dock in Cannery Row. And then there's all this unfolding forward of his work. He collected specimens to sell them, but he collected along the coast of North America. And there's a lot of professional monitoring that goes on the West Coast because of oil spills that have caused incredible damage to ecosystems over the years. And we know that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when there will be another one. And we need to have the data to quantify the damages to wildlife when it happens. So there's very, very professionally oriented and run monitoring programs that the state and the federal government run on the West Coast, but hugely, hugely augmented by citizen science projects, including ours. And I asked Pete Ramundi, who's the head of some of this very professional monitoring at the University of California at Santa Cruz, about his professional monitoring. And in our conversation, you know, he told me that he was as a marine biologist, hugely influenced by Ed Ricketts. And he wanted to be like Ed Ricketts when he grew up. And that also then Ricketts collected in Sitka, Alaska, which gave him a baseline for collecting up there today. So in a very real way, a very, very concrete way, Ed Ricketts, a citizen scientist from the 30s, is still having an impact not only on the data and the specimens, but on the spirit of the adventure of direct observation and community. So it's a story that is over and over again plays out in citizen science, and I think it's because it's so connected to natural history, those experiences of natural history, which is just incomparable. There's really nothing else that humans do that's quite like it.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I'm a huge Ricketts fan, of course, and his writings were influential for me as a marine biologist. But I think it does get back to this other thing that I think you write about so beautifully in your book about, Ricketts, his biology and how he wrote between Pacific tides, and was really the first one to organize a book by like zonation and the areas that things were found in, communities, not just go like mollusks and then echinoderms. So it was a different way of thinking about nature, and it's really like a naturalist way in some ways, right? I mean, it's not like how you tell the different barnacles apart, which is also what naturalists want, but it was like, where do you find these barnacles? But that work is so intertwined with him as a person, like his personality. And I don't know if it's because of Cannery Row and Steinbeck, or if it's just because he was so larger than life. But I thought about that a lot when I was rereading these chapters of your book about how with citizen science, and maybe with all science, I think actually this is with all science, that the personal and the scientific and the historical are all intertwined. Like I can't separate, when I saw something for the first time as a scientist from what I saw it as the first time as a person, and like who I was with and the experience. And that when we share our discoveries on iNaturalist for the data point, right, we're also sharing the story like of your experience. And with one of the things we try really hard to do in our program is create this community that you want to have those shared experiences with and that you want to share with online. And I don't know, like I just think in your book it made me like kind of crystallize some of those things for me, that like the intangible things, right? I'm like, oh, that's right. Like that's what Mary Ellen is talking about. And that is this experience that we all have. And it's so important.
It's experience, so it's felt and it's embodied. And that's, we sort of try to disembody science so that we can be more objective about it. At the same time, it's very important to have these embodied experiences where, that's where I was when, but I'll say something about the whole heroes part of the subtitle of my book. I don't really like the word heroes very much, really, because it's problematic, right? We tend to make heroes of special individuals. And certainly some people really are heroes, and they're unsung heroes, or they're sung heroes that really are heroes, like Martin Luther King. But the whole idea of a special individual is a little problematic and maybe contradictory to citizen science, actually, which is really about mob sourcing. So I think that though, my publisher said, Mary Ellen, if you want extinction in your title, you also have to have heroes and hope in your title.
Like you can't just have extinction.
I have to have extinction. And they're like, okay, that's the deal. And I said, okay, you can have your heroes and you can have your hope. And I do have hope, and I find many, many heroes who other people don't know. And I think though, there's a person that I profiled in my book, Sam Georgie, he's one of my heroes.
Yeah, he's a hero. I would call him.
He's just an amazing person. He's a U.S. Geological Survey scientist out at Patuxent in Maryland, which is kind of their natural history hub. And for his whole career, he's done citizen science, and he does it. He's the inventor of the BioBlitz. He didn't name it. A National Park Service ranger, named it a BioBlitz, but he conceived of doing a one-off inventory and joining the public to do it all at one place and one time. And he is the inventor of scores of citizen science projects that he starts them and he gives them away to people. He's just this great guy. And I heard him give a talk at the Los Angeles Museum of Natural History a few years ago, and he said to people, he said to the audience, if Thomas Edison had never been alive, there would still be electricity on in this room, because electricity was going to be invented, and all of the things were in the air to come together to coalesce into what we know as electricity. And it might have taken a few more years, and it might have come from a different sector, who knows, but it would have happened. So this idea that we give credit to Thomas Edison, it's sort of helpful to us to tell the story of how electricity comes about, but it's not entirely correct, right? And he said, a citizen scientist, though, it performs an act of observation in a time and a place that will never come again and can never come again. So I took a photo, a very happy photo for me, of a checkered butterfly, a very checker spot butterfly in the Presidio 2 days ago. And I thought, now nobody else is seeing that butterfly right there, date, time, latitude, longitude photo. And that is my heroic action of the day, because I am being a singular individual in making this connection in time and space with this creature. And he said, that's what the citizen scientist is. And I find that to be so profound.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like the most profound thing, right? When I look at the title, I know it's probably not what your publisher intended, but to me, it's like everyone is the hero, right? It's like everyone doing this together. We all are the heroes, and you can't do it without everyone. Because like you said, no one else can tell your story, and your story is seeing a variable checker spot in the Presidio. No one else saw that at that same time. And that data point is critical for our understanding, in this case, about the success of the reintroduction of variable checker spots in the Presidio. But it's also for you, I imagine, gave you some hope about the world during this moment of like kind of feeling hopeless. And that's the other part. The hope is that we all are witnessing changes like at a scale that are just sometimes overwhelming and terrible and awful. But to have this, to witness something and to share it gives us hope that things could get better, and that your data that you're collecting can be used for something for good. So to me, like, those are what I take out of the title.
That's good. That's great.
Right.
The other thing that citizen science does is, we it's not like we're just kind of outsourcing our own visual powers, but we are lending our own visual powers to what is really a global observatory network of nature that reveals more than that moment in time, actually. And actually, I think the monarch butterfly migration is a great example of what I'm talking about, where because of citizen scientists, we can plot the migration pattern over the course of a year of monarch butterflies. And we can do the same thing year after year after year after year. So, and then we also can plot climate change or temperature, precipitation patterns, vegetation patterns, agricultural patterns that are impacting milkweed and insects in general. And with all of that, we get to see the life history of the monarch butterfly unfold right in our own, so that what we see in this one moment when we see a monarch butterfly is not just that one instance, but it's now embedded in this like three-dimensional, multi-dimensional, back through time and space story of the monarch butterfly and how it makes a living in relationship to milkweed, and how it makes a living in relationship to its crazy migration that nobody fully understands. And every species has this kind of story that is this life history that operates at different scales. Just looking at butterflies, they operate at different scales. Not all of them do that kind of migration. Some of them don't migrate. And nature it's seemingly infinitely complex this way, but that's actually at the heart of what we need to be tuned into about nature in order to save it, is that, when you snip the thread today, you're not just snipping today's thread. You're snipping a thread of something that has perhaps millions of years of history behind it. And the more that we can feel a part of the long time frame, and the more that we can feel a part of generations, and not like it's only us, it's who came before us, who we are paying forward, but also we're doing this on behalf of those who will come after us, of all taxa, including Homo sapiens, but including all the other ones too.
That's so beautiful and so true, right? You think about all the observations, like of all the data collected by individual people and then modeled and then collected by satellites, and then all the things that are planted by individual people, and that all of it comes together in this like tapestry to tell the story of monarch butterflies. That it's like the people that collected the data, that are everyone that's bringing it together, and then the storytellers, right? Like people like you to like distill that into this complicated web of, scientific papers and modeling and equations, to make a simple story, like a simpler story that people can really connect with. I mean, when you're out there talking about citizen science, like a lot of times you're talking to people who've never thought about these things before.
Yeah. Well, it's, to me, one of my preoccupations is, this kind of connection between art and science, and sort of what has been sundered by centuries of different ways of ordering our fields of knowledge. But it's something that artists and storytellers of all kinds, visual artists as well as verbal artists and video artists, it's something that art can really bring to science, is the ability to talk about multiple time frames within a bounded space. Yeah. So this is something a book can do, right? A book, a narrative can go back in time and bring you back forward to the present, bring you to the future, and then come back again. And some of you know who are here that Rebecca and I were among a big team of people who made a spatio-temporal map of San Francisco. Now, a map can do the same thing, where in a visual format, which is really art, you can bring together past, present, and future. And this is where the science communication, I think, really needs to just be focused right there, because first of all, it expresses the depth of reality in a way that often reading pieces of science that is not in the context of time and space is meaningless to those of us who are not initiated into particular fields. And it's not appropriate for everything. People doing very specialized science need to just do it their way, that's fine. But the science communication, so storytellers where you can put a past, a present, and a future. And then, of course, to tell a story, you do need that narrative arc, and that's where the individual comes in. Joseph Campbell said it's the personality that tells the tale. And I think that's right. We actually and that's why we want the hero. We want Ed Ricketts and we want Rachel Carson, because we want to actually be able to embody complicated, multi-temporal information in a package that we can relate to, which is another person.
Exactly. One thing I was going to add to your storytelling is that, you talk about writing and in the book, and if we think about butterflies, then our friend and colleague Jane Kim, who drew the map, also has another project called Migrating Murals, where she has these migrating animals, huge murals across the areas that the animals migrate, right? So it also has this ability to capture space and scale in a way that is really hard to comprehend. And she just finished this incredible set of murals in downtown San Francisco of monarchs. And I mean, the number of people that know about monarchs and think about monarchs in San Francisco, I think is just it's just increased the understanding of how animals, other animals use this space with us. And so it's this other component to the storytelling, right?
Well, I'm a huge fan of Jane Kim, and if you live in San Francisco, you come through here, you know, take a drive in the Tenderloin. I think it's on Hyde Street. There's this gigantic apartment building, I think, with, I mean, gigantic monarchs that are gorgeous painted on it. And it's arresting, right? It stops you. You look at it and you go, oh my God.
So true.
And what it reminds you is, oh, you know, monarchs are living on this earth too. They're trying to get from point A to point B just like I am. And it's not just me in this car or me on the sidewalk. It's also these other creatures. Can't we make pathways? Can't we integrate and make permeable the way that we live so that they can also live their lives too? And it's really bringing our attention to that. That is the first necessary thing, because as you say, Rebecca, people don't think about it at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and then, I mean, we want to leave some time for questions and have open up for a bigger discussion, but I wonder, we're talking a lot about butterflies, and that kind of leads me to ask you about the project that you're working on now, which is about butterflies. But maybe you could tell us a little spoiler, tell us a little bit about what you're working on now before we open it up to hear questions from everybody.
Well, I'm happy to do that, although I'm going to, even in trying to synopsize it, it's just absolutely sprawling and ridiculous, and it is. We'll see if I can get it under control. So I just actually had to make a PowerPoint to give a presentation on this the other day, which was good. And the story is this, that when I finished, you know, citizen science, I thought, okay, now people think of citizen science, you know, all of us here in this virtual room are fans, I think, of citizen science and kind of understand what it is, but still, and we're percolating that out, and we're going to keep doing that. But a lot of people just hear the word science and they tune out. And I'm thinking, how can I have to make people understand that losing nature is not an option. And it doesn't seem to work to say we're not going to be able to live physical lives without nature, because people can't believe that. So I've had the long idea for a long, long time about art, that art really is formed from the natural world. And I've been kind of obsessed with Vladimir Nabokov in this, who was an amateur lepidopterist, but he also was a huge, he suggested that his art, this very consciousness and that his creativity was provoked by looking at butterflies. The good thing about him too is that, being actually a serious lepidopterist, he didn't anthropomorphize them. So to begin with, I thought I would do a book that was kind of Nabokov and then butterfly science, the butterfly as a model system, which it is, for understanding how nature works. But then I've kind of changed course in the last couple of years because of work that's being done at Jasper Ridge, which is at Stanford. I see Jorge is among us today too, who's the education director there. And Jasper Ridge they're doing this amazing project that's about the Anthropocene. So this is a geological term, and they are, I won't try to explain the whole thing, but they are coring these lakes at Jasper Ridge to try to determine human impacts on the ecosystem and on the geology, because humans are impacting even geology now over time. And I thought, you know, that coring a lake is like a memory. It's a memory bank. This is a physical way of recalling what actually happened, what's history. And right now, you know, every single human enterprise is coming up against a limit, a hard limit. And this Anthropocene work is going to help reveal that. So does that sound complicated enough? Oh my God. We'll see. I got to take my.
It sounds like more than one book, but maybe it's not, because I think that's one of your talents, is weaving all these stories together. For sure.
It's more complicated.
It's complicated. So I know, Brianna, I haven't been looking at the chat, but I know some people might have put some questions in the chat. I don't know, Brianna, if you see any now. Otherwise, if anyone has a question, oh, here's one. Okay, here's one from Mike. Hi, Mike. I guess I can read them. How does COVID-19 alter the equation of the sixth mass extinction, right? So some people are, I'm sure we've all heard about this, like nature's getting this break while we're all sequestered. And Mary Ellen, like, what do you think? I guess I'm putting this to you, Mary Ellen. What do you think about this, like, chance for recovery and a chance for citizen scientists to document things moving forward, like after this? And I have something to say about it too, I think.
Well, it's a fantastic occasion for citizen science. First of all, lots more people are doing it because they're sheltered at home. And yes, people are seeing nature, like just as Rebecca was saying, in her own backyard because they're looking at it. And then in some cases, we're seeing nature kind of taking over spaces that might have been kind of off limits to them when we were there. That said, and then the other thing I think that is good for the cause of extinction is that I think that we're understanding on a really first chakra level that the way we live is imperiling our very lives, and COVID is an example of that. It's actually rather a mild one because the next pandemic might not be so mild. And the way that we treat animals is very connected to why this virus is happening, why it's among us, and then of course, our incredible global connectedness, which it does so many great things, but it also is very negative on nature in many ways. So what I think is I think there's a real opportunity as we reboot the economy to put in new systems for doing the things that we do that are more friendly to wildlife. At the same time, there's going to be pressure to get everything, all pistons firing as fast as possible. And that's not going to be good for nature because we're just going to use the fossil fuels and we're just going to get the trucks rolling. And so it's a little bit of but I feel like people are getting it in the gut. Like, we can't just keep doing business as usual. So I think that's a net positive. What do you think, Rebecca?
Well, I mean, I think, of course, like, we don't want a global pandemic and so many people to be suffering and dying to lead to immediately suffering and dying to be, I'm kind of wary of this silver lining kind of discussion because I think it's so upsetting what's happening and what people are experiencing. That being said, I think that people are observing, and I can think about, for our work, people are paying attention and sharing what they've found in maybe a different way, but just as much, if not more than ever. I think that many of us are really feeling, and people who haven't even really thought that much about their connection to nature or their need to be outside are feeling it more than ever. Like, whoa, like, I just need to be not in my house and I need to be in a park or like looking at the blue sky or like a wide open space. So I think that that's something positive that people are feeling the need for being outside and the need for nature in a different way. I can look at the results from the City Nature Challenge that just finished, still going on actually, the identification phase of the City Nature Challenge, which for those of you who don't know is a 4-day, usually a competition between cities and metro areas to see who can document the most nature. This year, it was not a competition, it was a collaboration to see how we can work together to document the nature near us. And it's organized by local organizers all over the world, but the lead organizers are Allison Young, my co-director and colleague and friend, and Leela Higgins from the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles. And they did an amazing job, and all of the local organizers did this really cool job of kind of shifting to be in community doing this together. And although we did not make as many observations as last year, there's still a lot of observations that were made. But maybe the most striking thing is that more people participated this year than last year, right? So even though people are sheltering in place, more people were out there making and sharing their observations. And they might be of quite different species. We're almost to the same number of species, like almost 31,000 species, and that was going to go up as we identify things. So it's hard to say if it's because it's not a competition, or also just that people needed a different kind of outlet. And I think people needed to be in a community in a different way. Even though we're not together, right? Doing the same thing at the same time can give you that same feeling. And just one more thing before I go to another question, Mike. One of the things that we're thinking about in our coastal monitoring, we do an annual event called Snapshot Cal Coast, where we encourage people to make and share observations along the California coast in June, which will either not happen in June because our governor is on the verge of closing our beaches, or will be very different in June. If we are able to get out to beaches this summer, volunteers and naturalists on their own will be able to collect some data that the professionals are not allowed to collect at this moment because they can't do their surveys. The marine monitoring that Mary Ellen was mentioning, they're not doing surveys this summer. So we can help fill in some data gaps, and it's something that are not exactly the same data, but at least some data. And so this is something that our team is thinking a lot about.
So Rebecca, I'm going to just respond to something Jorge wrote here in the group chat that I think connects with what you were talking about. He says he liked how we expressed the citizen community science that allows for people to also feel nature. What are some of your best examples of this feeling that you've witnessed with technology? And I think there's two things. Rebecca just alluded to something that's super important about citizen science, which is when we do get to do it, even if we do it by ourselves, like even when I go and make that observation, I'm all by myself of that checker spot butterfly, people are still looking at my observation and giving me an email and giving me an ID and giving me a comment, and I'm in the community of iNaturalists with those people, and they're with me even if I'm alone. But then when I'm out in the tide pool, which I will be again, I'm sure with Rebecca, I'm out with my people, right? That's really fun too. And then to just tie it in with Cameron's comment of people saying, oh, that's not for me. Making that connection, especially for maybe people who are in a different generation, can be tough because they're, how many of us know birders who make lists of all the birds they see every day, and they live like in places where they see a lot, and they just put them in their kitchen drawer. And I say, could you please give that to eBird? And I'm like, no, but it could be so useful for other people. Like, really? I don't get that. Like, so I don't know. But I have seen people use iNaturalist and then who are, new to this altogether. Then when they get a comment back, like, oh, that's a funny place to see that squirrel, then they sort of perk up, like, oh my gosh, look, somebody wrote back to me. And then they start to get into it a little bit. So you could try to get your mom. I think there's some specific squirrel projects out there. So she might get into it because she wants to see other people's data and other people's photographs if she's a squirrel nut. So try that.
Yeah, I would just piggyback on what you said, Marilyn. I mean, of course, like as my having people make and share their data as that being like my professional mantra. Of course, I hope everybody shares their data, but I mean, Cameron, I hope your mom realizes that she is a scientist, right? Like even if she's paying attention and she's documenting it and she's noticing change, and I imagine that she's asking questions about what the squirrels are doing. The only step she's really missing is sharing it with other people to really do science. But you can make observations, and if you get great joy from writing your bird list and putting it in your drawer, that's fine, right? I mean, you don't have to share it. If you do share it, you might gain something like a community that you didn't know you needed, and those data would be used in a different way. So, there's something there along the spectrum of making observations and sharing them on eBird or iNaturalist. There's a place for everyone. The thing that I hope to convey to people is that observing natural history and wondering like the name of a plant and looking it up and figuring it out, like that's science. Like, and we're all doing that science. So science is not just test tubes and beakers and lab coats. Like asking questions about the natural world and finding those answers is natural history, including what the name of something is science. So your mom's a scientist, even though she doesn't think she is. And let me see if there are some more questions that I can find.
There's a book out, been out for a few years. I can't remember the woman's name who wrote it. It's called The Nature Fix. And she's basically given an overview of science about what being out in nature does for us physically and mentally and emotionally. And, you know, it's very new, that's very new research, but of course, it is what we already know. Like, it feels good to be out in nature. And then, of course, we have to quantify that in our culture in order to believe it. You know, the forest bathing, I think, is hilarious. Like, yes, it feels really good to walk in the woods. Do we have to quantify, you know, what kind of endorphins get provoked out in there? I guess we do. But the fact is that actually think about it, we evolved outside. We evolved proprioception, perceptions all over, you know, a 360 degree view of our bodies in space was necessary for our lives for most of the Homo sapiens time on Earth and going back to our ancestors. And so, you know, we've reduced our senses mostly to these eyeballs. And is there any wonder we have attention deficit disorder and depression? And, you know, we're truncating ourselves. And when you're outside in nature, there's a recuperation that occurs for the rest of your body. And that's part of it. That's part of citizen science. Although, of course, doing Zooniverse from your desktop is also citizen science. So it's a big, we don't exclude anybody.
Exactly. I feel like we kind of touched on Jorge's question about feeling. And, you know, I think there are lots of different ways to talk about the emotional feelings about making observations, whether it's like how cool the thing is that you're seeing, whether it's kind of like he was alluding to, I think, you know, just this idea of like being on a walk and focused and paying attention to like, is that wildflower different from this wildflower, different than this wildflower? It allows you to like not think about anything else, right? So it's kind of like a zoning out, like a Zen moment of doing one thing. And that is really great, to not be worrying about like global pandemic for like 5 minutes while you're thinking about flowers and whether or not they're different. And I think that it can just be like, there are lots of different ways to have this emotional connection, not only to what you're seeing, but that, you know, maybe you care for a place or you understand a place in a different way. And I think that leads to some of the things that Mary Ellen was talking about that she noticed in The Spine of the Continent in her research for that book, that, you know, it's not just the data that people were collecting that led to changes, like the conservation outcomes that she was looking for. It's that they had an emotional connection and were motivated to write letters and show up to meetings and make change and advocate for places. So it's like the feeling, it's the people making observations and giving us more data, but it's also that people are advocates. And that is another thing that's really, really important to make change. And that comes from a sense of feeling connected or a feeling place.
Oh, and one of the reasons why the Citizen Tracker project that I participated in made such an impact on me, you know, I don't know, you guys might be where everybody's dialed in from, but, you know, Rebecca and I are both in California, where, you know, we're coastal people, and we're pretty good comparatively about protecting natural resources compared to other parts of the country. The Spine of the Continent is the Intermountain West, and that is a place where nature is treated differently. It's kind of, there's more of a black and white. And, you know, there's more of a standoff between environmentalists on the one hand, and then on the other hand, ranchers and hunters who aren't always aligned with each other, but they often are oppositional with environmentalists. And so these people fight a lot and don't get a lot done a lot of the time. And then meanwhile, the developers move in, right, while they're arguing. And that's really what happens. But on Citizen Tracker, I was in Mexico for, I can't remember how long it was, with 9 other people. And there were right-wing, this was before Trump, and I'm sure they voted for Trump, people. And there were super lefties. We had a couple people who had spent some time in jail. One who had spent time in jail because he was an earth firster who threw himself like in front of a bulldozer and was arrested for disrupting the peace. And then, somebody else who I didn't ask why he was in jail. But here's the thing, that when we were all out learning to look for jaguar, nobody talked about their political beliefs. We didn't talk about our personal lives, really. We were all focused, and this is something about focusing that Rebecca was just alluding to. When you're focused on an instance in nature, whether it's tracking something or observing a bird, you're focused on that thing. And this gave everybody actually permission to connect with each other without betraying our personal or political allegiances that for what other reasons we feel like we have to hold on to. And I feel like that's actually a positive thing about COVID now is that, we are looking past, we're acting on behalf of each other regardless of our political allegiances, because we all do recognize our common humanity. And then in the Citizen Tracker, we were all acknowledging our common community, including animals that are hard to see, like jaguars. Yeah, if anybody wants to, so we're trying to make sure that we see these comments, but if anybody feels like they want to say something that we're not seeing, please undo yourself and just put your hand up, and we want to hear from you.
Yeah, and we are getting close to the top of the hour. There was a couple of folks that mentioned an interest in hearing more about K through 12 or just how inspiring this can be to kids. And I'm wondering if that might be a fun thing to maybe end our conversation on today.
Sure, I can start maybe and leave the last word to Mary Ellen, but right now all kids are home learning, and I think with the kids in your life, observing nature, whether it's by using iNaturalist and making and sharing your observations, or just doing it like nature notebooking or drawing or just paying attention, is a great way to engage kids in all these practices of observing and paying attention to nature. There's also another app developed by the iNaturalist team called Seek that is meant for children, people under 13, because it doesn't share any location information, and it's a really nice gateway to iNaturalist. You can hook it up to your iNaturalist account to share your observations, but it works by just using the machine learning. It's an amazing thing that happens using the machine learning. You can actually just hold your phone up to a plant or an animal, and it will suggest identifications before you even submit an observation. And you can win badges and learn what's been seen around you. It's a really, really fun thing for everybody, not just kids. But I think, for me, or in our work, we do work with kids. We have a National Science Foundation and Wellcome Trust grant to understand how young people learn through natural history museums, citizen science, and it's been great. And Annie Miller, who might be on this call, is amazing and works on that project. But that being said, our work mostly focuses on adults and families. And so one of the things I think is really important is that, yes, citizen science is a great tool for science education for all ages. And sometimes adults need even extra push to allow themselves to be curious and not know and share without knowing. And so it's really important that it's not just for kids, although this is an amazing thing. And I wish there was a great curriculum that incorporated using Seek in the classroom, and hopefully our team at the Academy and other people will work on building that, because I think there are lots and lots of opportunities in the K through 12 space. And I think that you all are having, the CSA is having a roundtable about citizen science in the university space, higher education. And I think there's a lot of great folks working in that area. Mary Ellen.
Well, that's great, Rebecca. And, I think one of the places where citizen science is really blossoming is in the educational space. And K through 12 is a lot of it. There's just amazing stuff being done all over the country that, I've met school teachers who are bringing, DNA kits outside with their kids, and they're doing DNA, and then, they're barcoding bugs. It's unbelievable. I'll say I've been teaching citizen science. I've been teaching it to graduate students for a few years, and this year I did to undergraduates. So these are kids that are probably like 22, 21. And and they're into it, but when I had them, I had a guest speaker, Constance Taylor, who's an amazing ranger with the East Bay Municipal Parks District. And she had them journaling, doing nature journaling. And oh my God, they blossomed doing that. And I feel like that one thing that does get left out of the device is kind of the more triggering of your own creativity and your own creative response. And we used iNaturalist together with the journaling, so that they were using, pictures of species they had taken to reference their drawings, but then also I had them actually drawing things that were real in nature outside. And actually bringing all of those together, there was a bit of magic to having the kids draw, I will say. So I would recommend that part of it. I like it too. And you don't have to you just have to say you don't have to do it perfectly.
Yeah.
Just have fun trying to sketch something or outline it even.
It's true. My daughter, she's 8, and sometimes to lure her on a hike, she knows I'll be taking pictures and we'll be taking pictures, but she's been drawing like a map of our walk and where we're finding different things, which is kind of a version of nature journaling. But so it's so fun, because then we end up with these like awesome maps of our walk, but it allows her, she's artistic and loves to draw, and so it allows her to do that while we're taking pictures and kind of searching for different things.
I want to do that. That sounds really fun.
That does.
Yay, Jorge, thanks. And
yeah.
Everyone for nice comments in the chat. It's been so fun to talk.
Yeah, this has been a really inspiring chat. I feel like a lot of people have been commenting in the chat, and just listening to you guys, I feel invigorated and inspired as well. So yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone who's on the call today, and to thank Rebecca and Mary Ellen for sharing. This was kind of a new format for us, and if you liked it, definitely let us know, and we'll try to schedule some more of these in the future. Like I mentioned in the chat, we did record this today, and I will be sharing the recording at least with those folks that registered, and we'll look into maybe sharing it more broadly, because I do think this was a great conversation, and I'd love to share. So thank you guys, and we'll hopefully see you again soon on another CSA webinar.
Yeah, thanks everybody.